Felix Rivera.
Christopher Constant.
Dick Trainee.
Eric Croft.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Pete Peterson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Colin Byrd.
Mike Chadwick, Toronto. Scott Lee is from
Okay. And Zig sent us his listing of things, so we've got Zig's comments. Mr. Harris,
Thank you, Mr.
should we
Chairman.
talk about SAP?
So we are now on the 20th of October. We've been in production for about 3 weeks now, 15 business days. We continue to experience some problems with payroll, and we are working diligently to try to address those to make sure that payroll is correct. We have some challenges within the payroll process that we're working to take care of. One of the things I think is important to mention about payroll, and all of them certainly would be well versed in speaking about this, is that in essence we have 9 businesses that we essentially run. We have each of the different unions has its own rules, its own requirements, a whole host of complexities that adds to the payroll system. So we will continue to both identify problems and then work to solve them as payroll cycles come and as we continue to move forward. And we've already identified a fair number of problems, a fair number of defects with the system in terms of its calculation of correct payroll, and so we've logged those. We log every defect we find, and are working to implement solutions for that as rapidly as we can. So this is our second payroll date. The first date of payroll was based on a pay period starting 9/11, and so the first pay period was October 6th. We issued a series of checks. We noticed we had some discrepancies there that were of concern to us. We weren't sure why they happened, so we addressed that with a series of temporary measures, things we wouldn't normally do, basically making sure the people who were supposed to be paid 80 hours, that we had a record of them being paid 80 hours. In this pay period, we fixed a number of problems that we had identified for the 10-6 payroll, and we have, in the 10-20 payroll, we're issuing people a check for the 10-20 payroll, and then we're adding a correction to that, in some cases perhaps a deduction, for the 10-6 payroll. So some people will basically get a couple of pay advices this period, one representing 10-20 and one representing some fixes for 10-6. This pay period, I think we have some remaining issues. Our goal is to make sure that everybody who works for us is kept whole. Payroll is one of our critical areas that we want to make sure we take care of. So it's one of our highest priorities. Actually, in the world of SAP, I'd say it's the highest priority. We want to make sure that's right. And as you know, some of you I think have experienced some pay issues, and we're working to correct those. But one of the things we want to make sure we take care of first is if somebody didn't receive the right amount of money and they were shorted, we want to make sure we're taking care of those folks, because we recognize it's a burden on them financially, and we're working to take care of that. I think today we've had some folks who have experienced some problems, so we're going to write an additional set of checks today to take care of some people who the system has not correctly processed their payroll, and then we'll sort out some of that later.
Okay. We've been added by John. Willing just joined us, so welcome, John. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to.
Go ahead, Suzanne. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I've asked Dusty to come up here from MLNP because we've got some complaints from MLNP. I'll give you 3 minutes. We normally don't do it, but given the fact this is payroll, I'm concerned about it. Can you tell us what's going on from your perspective? Because my concern is I'm told they may file an FSLA complaint today. So I want to know what's going on before they file a complaint.
Right.
Go ahead.
Comments Mr. Harris made, our line section, some of our NECA linemen, I believe all of them, as well as the NECA wiremen, are getting paid straight time for all of their hours. I had one employee who was shorted at least $3,300 last check. That was not corrected this time around. In fact, none of the pay errors were corrected this time around. We had about 120 employees whose paychecks were wrong last week. It's about the same this week. It doesn't look like any of the errors of municipal light and power were corrected. overpaid. I had one employee who didn't get a check at all. As Mr. Harris said, they did cut some checks last week. I think 20 of those checks came to ML&P, and the employee who did not get a check got paid for his 80 hours. Some of the other corrections for the 80 hours was 12-hour rotating employees who were not supposed to work 80 hours and were overpaid $1,800, but got a second check to compound it up to $20-some odd because of the 80 hours. Our vehicle maintenance night shift is getting double time for all their hours. As I said, the line department's getting shorted. The 12-hour rotating shift it's just a mess. Not even close. Some of the leave hours are messed up, meal periods are messed up. The errors in pay in some of the contracts is a little larger than others. Ours is $50 a day if there's a mistake on the paycheck. I had met with the lineman this morning, as did Mark Johnston as well, to see what their issues were. But the guys who are getting paid straight time for 102 to 140 hours, as you say, it's a violation of FLSA, violates federal law. It's completely unacceptable. I mean, at a minimum, calculate what it should have been, pay them the difference. I keep getting told the reason they don't want to do that is once they fix the system, it should back pay all the way back. If you track the payment that you make that's extra, you can deduct it from that check before it ever goes out. I would think, I don't know how the system works. In my mind, it would work that way, but I don't know. But we have set, like I said, it was about 60% of our payroll was wrong, one way or the other.
Okay. Any questions from assembly members?
FLSA is Federal Labor Standards?
Fair Labor Standards Act. It's minimum wage, anytime over 40 is time and a half minimum.
That's just my
Any
question.
questions?
You know, straight time as opposed to they should be getting overtime.
That is correct.
Are you a union member or are you,
I'm the chief steward. of the
Chief steward?
I
Okay.
represent the employees there.
do we have a contact for the steward?
Yes, and in fact, I think my apologies, I've been, as you expect,
You've been otherwise engaged.
I've been otherwise engaged, but one of the solutions, I appreciate you coming by, because I just had a conversation with Mark Johnston where what I've asked him to do is to work with his staff to give me the numbers of people at ML&P that are not paid correctly. And what our plan is to do exactly as Dustin suggested. We're going to write them a check. And basically, we're going to pay the difference of what the calculations say we should pay them, and then we'll clean it up later. So your members will see some deduction at a future date. But right now, our concern is that we have people who are working for us, doing our work, who aren't paid accurately and aren't being paid. For the folks that are paid a little too much, okay, all right, we'll get their money back at some point in time. For the people that aren't being paid enough, that is just. That is something we have to address immediately and can't let go. I mean, people have bills to pay, they have mortgages, and so we are very cognizant of that. So my goal is to, before the end of the day, to have the folks at ML&P who haven't been paid correctly by virtue of not being paid enough, to have a solution for those folks. And all I can do is I can ask the patience and understanding and really forgiveness of the folks at ML&P. This is not how we would want to have a payroll launch and go forward, and we are working as rapidly as we can to fix it. It is really it's a critical priority for us.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. Eric?
So, I guess that's my concern and some other assembly members is, you said you were otherwise engaged, and I could see that. You've got all kinds of other duties, and we know you to be, I know you to be very good at your job, but what structure do we have so that it's not always you having to fix, with all your other duties, things that are probably going to be going wrong for a couple of months at least?
We've been
So-
joined by Mr. Dyson.
Right, so I
Sorry, Mr.
appreciate
Harris.
that. I made that comment in regards to, I think I had gotten an email from you about
I emailed
contacting you,
I
and
assumed
I,
you were busy though.
yeah, so that's why I brought it up, because I had to have time to get back to him before this meeting, and.
But I don't
apologize
necessarily
about
want
that.
you to have the responsibility to get back,
Who
like
you
somebody
have.
else, right?
Well, true, but let me, so this is probably a good segue to talk about how we have structured SAP and our operations system going forward. So I'm the senior executive in charge of the SAP Operations Committee. It's a group representing folks from payroll, from ER, IT, purchasing, AWWU and ML&P, and we meet on a regular basis weekly to address both immediate issues as well as long-term issues regarding the operation, maintenance, and problems that we're seeing with the launch of SAP. The idea being that it's an opportunity for us on an organized way to think about where things are at right now and what are problems coming forward, how we plan for it. And in this case, we've started to see more defects than we have fixes for at the moment. So we are addressing those in terms of a prioritization effort to make sure that we are addressing the highest priority items first and understanding within the team of operations what those priorities are and how those priorities are evaluated. Right now, of course, as I mentioned, getting payroll right is a critical priority for us. There are, of course, other issues that we're not shying away from. So it's not just me. There's an entire team of people throughout the municipality, as well as at the moment we still have some consultants that are helping us through the end of October and the middle of November who were with the project and who are in fact, as problems are identified, as defects are identified, who are helping us both evaluate a solution and implement that solution. So I am by no means a one-man show here. There's a whole host of people throughout the municipality who are addressing this and working diligently to try to take care of issues.
So what's the name of that committee?
Well, right now I'm just calling it the SAP Operations Committee. That's what I call it. Others like to call it the Operations Leadership Team. To me, I call it the Operations Committee. We are the people who are working to put SAP, the system, into place with the expectation that sometime within the next 6 months we reach a steady state where it's simply a piece of software we use day to day to take care of our backbone
And
financial and payroll activity.
It sets the criteria for what changes, for prioritizing the changes?
We have, I've asked people to go look at the list of defects that are out there now. Some are critical, it's just, we have to have that. We are, as a team, working to identify what those priority items would be. This week, for example, I had folks go around the room through the committee and give us what they think is their critical priority at the moment. And so, starting with that list, being able to address the work that each group is doing to try to stand up SAP, the software system for us.
Yeah, just put me back at the bottom. Thank you.
I've got you at the bottom. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The community has got several of these enterprise-type operations. How was ESP installed better at some of the other ones, like Solid Waste Services or the Port or something, where they're not having as many problems? Or
Well, I think the way to think about this is to think about it as essentially a backbone enterprise resource program. It handles all of our billing, it handles time, it handles our purchasing. So some of those essential functions that we provide on a central basis. So I can't speak to the specifics of why Solid Waste Services, why we haven't heard as many complaints. I'm thankful that we haven't had a lot of complaints at Solid Waste Services with payroll. Nor am I able to tell you at the moment why Ed Alden might have some insight into this, why we're having some problems at IBEW. One of the challenges is payroll consists really of two pieces. One is how time is entered on part of the employee and then approved by their managers. And the other piece is once we've got that data, how we then grind it through the machine and print out a paycheck with all the required deductions and so forth. My sense is that the payroll side of it seems like it's functioning, we're getting it closer. We're still having some issues with time for whatever reasons. I'm not certainly putting blame on the individual employees or on their managers, but SAP is a fairly complex enterprise system where in order to get somebody's time entered correctly, we first load a schedule. So as when you deal with people who have unique schedules, they work the night shift, they work 4 hours here and had 8 hours off. Anytime you have that kind of situation, it presents an additional challenge that we're working through. And those are the examples of defects that we're identifying and working to fix.
okay.
Anything else, sir?
Thank you.
Forrest?
I think you answered this, but I guess I want to ask a little more pointed question to Alden probably. to the degree that you can, you describe exactly what went wrong at MLMP and IBW. Why is the system malfunctioning? What exactly is going wrong?
I haven't really been involved in hearing about what the concerns are and so forth, but I had some speculation, as Mr. Harris mentioned. You know, the contracts all have different degrees of difficulty and nuances to be able to go in, and some are easier and some are harder to be able to administer. We also, if you remember, we had 5 different time and attendance systems before we brought this online, so there are some differences that we're probably engaged in there, but I would second what Mr. Harris spoke with regards to scheduling. I think we've had some issues with schedules, and that's on the time side. And that you have to collect the time in correctly first in order to be able to process it. And I would suspect that that's what they're probably working through right now, is the different scheduling aspects that maybe we didn't quite take as much of a look at as we would have maybe hoped in front before we tested it and got through it at that particular point. So that's why I think you're seeing some variances across units and across bargaining units because of complexity. And then I think the scheduling aspect of it has caused us some challenges.
Anything else, sir?
No, thank you.
Mr. France, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question may have been addressed in yesterday's meeting, so I apologize, but has the magnitude of the impact of the defects been quantified in terms of number of people who've been overpaid, underpaid, total dollar value, or, I mean, just to get an idea? I hadn't heard about, what Dusty had, or spoke to with ML&P. So is there anything that shows the number of people who've been overpaid, underpaid, by how much, in what areas?
Through the chair, so Mr. LaFrance. No, I don't have an answer for you on that. I will say that my direction, the direction of the SAP Operations Committee, has been to start focusing on finding solutions for the problems we've been identifying. We're certainly doing some analysis of where we're at in terms of dollars, but what I want to do is I want to move. We kind of have a little fire. We have a fire burning. When we don't pay people correctly, that's a fire that's burning. I want to start fixing problems through the payroll cycles so that I'm not adding continuously, payroll cycle after payroll cycle, more fuel to the fire. So I'm going to have to do some cleanup in the next month, 2 months, 3 months, as we go back and start to look at each of these things. And I'll have a better sense then of what the degree of error is. I think on the 10-6 payroll, when we went ahead and said we recognize some people haven't been paid correctly, I think that was about a $200,000 total dollar number, where we wrote about 460 paychecks. In some cases, as Dusty mentioned, some of the people were overpaid. But we felt that it was better to, err on the side of positive. We didn't want somebody to fall afoul of the bank or the creditors or so forth if they were underpaid. So I don't have a sense of that. And I think it's reasonable to say that as we go forward and we find the errors and fix them, and we go back and we retest each payroll for what it should have been, that in the end we're going to get that all washed out. One thing we are very cognizant of is if I had to choose between paying somebody $10 more or $10 less, I'd rather pay them $10 more. I'd rather err on the side of paying somebody a little bit too much rather than not paying them enough.
Anything else, ma'am?
No, I guess in terms of underpay, we know that one person did not receive a check at all.
They cut a second check that day.
Okay, on the same day.
But it just, SAP didn't pay him for whatever reason.
Okay.
Well, and
But he did get his check.
right, and I will say this, that as we paychecks involve not just the deposit to your bank, it involves withdrawals for your medical benefits, your
House payments.
retirements, all the other parts and pieces. So we're working as well to make sure that's right. I think one of the things we're going to do with today's solution, though, I've got some folks that I'm going to make sure I write a check for. Going to have to go, just to give you a heads up, I'm probably going to have to go back and fix the deductions that we would have normally taken out. But again, that's some fixes I'm going to have to take care of.
Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have sort of a whole list of questions I came up with after reading Zig's report, but I'm going to limit myself and behave and just ask 2 questions.
Okay.
We
We have 35
I know,
minutes. Don't behave yourself too much.
I thought our next work session's at 11:30.
What time's our next work session then?
11:30.
Yeah.
11:30,
Yeah, 5
okay.
Yep.
minutes.
So I'll
Jay,
be-
I'm surprised. I've got 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Yep. So
Excuse me.
there's a whole host of questions and issues that Zig brings up regarding what we're going to do from here on out. But I just want to highlight 2 things. On page 23 and 24, Zig asks a whole host of questions for the new executive sponsor, which I believe is you, Mr. Harris.
That's correct.
I assume, I'm going to point out 2 questions, but I assume you're going to get answers to him on all of these.
I think I've answered all of his questions already.
Oh, fantastic. Well then, could you then, since you've answered it already, the last question on page 23 and the last question on page 24 were the ones that I had.
Sure, so the last question on page 23 is, will a capital project be identified for the more significant continuing work? That is something that we are looking at, particularly in the realm of, it's sort of to go back and kind of give the accounting definition of the distinction between capital and operating. If something is in service, it's now operating. However, if we're going to add an additional feature or part or whatever, that would be capital. If it's going to be something new enhancement, right? At the moment, we don't have any plans for new capital. We don't plan to do new add-ons, enhancements, and so forth. I think the sense would be that we want to get what we have right now stabilized and working, so that then I think the other question, the other part of that question that he hasn't really asked is, do we have, and I think it was Mr. Dyson brought this up yesterday, do we have the right level of resources to help us in the coming months? And that is something that we are evaluating and recognizing that in a balanced budget environment, if we're going to ask for some additional resources to address some of these problems, it means we have fewer resources for some other area. So right now, though, we are looking at whether or not we have the right mix of people to help us as we address these problems going forward. Certainly, the sooner we reach a stabilized period, the better off the entire organization is. We have a fair number of consultants who have been with the project for during this last 2 years, 2.5 years. Some of them are preparing to finish up their work with us by mid-November. If we need some of those folks for longer, that's what we're looking at right now. And I don't have an answer on that. I don't have an answer on where we'd get the money to pay for it.
Anything else,
But
sir?
again, that would come back to this question of prioritization. We would look at where we would see the greatest need to provide essential functionality. They will be one of the essential functions that we want this system to do, and making decisions based upon a prioritization of what we see as problems. And I mentioned yesterday that essential functionality, namely those critical and high requirement functions. The other would be cost-benefit analysis. That would be another where we spend $1, but we get $2 worth of value at some point. We expect this software system to start. We expect to start being able to extract value out of it. We've invested a lot of money. We want to start seeing some value from it. And then the last piece would be enhancements to make it easier to work with. Well, for the moment, we're going to find the workarounds to help us get the job in those categories.
Anything else?
My second question wasn't answered, but that's okay because we're running out.
Robert, we've got some questions from Zig. Would like you to answer the assembly on. I'll have Rose give you the questions.
Okay.
Mark, by close of business day, could you send an email to our clerk letting us know what we've done with our employees' payroll? I want to make sure that every employee in MLNP has been taken care of. I don't care how you guys do it, that's up to you. But I want to know that we don't have employees that are not getting a paycheck. Eric?
Yeah, well, I know we're just under time. Zig has been recommending for a while that the executive sponsor be either Alden or the Chief Information Officer. Why was it a good idea, with all your other duties, to task you with this?
Probably the best answer would be that in my role, I'm responsible for an entirety of back office functionality. So, in some organizations, for example, an ER department could report to the CFO. It would be that back office central core functionality. So, when there is an issue that touches several different groups, it's it's organizationally more efficient to have the person who's able to say, okay, there's a problem here, I need it fixed right now. And so certainly we have engagement on the part of our IT director, our CIO. We have engagement on the part of our director of payroll. We have engagement in the director of ER. So all those folks are engaged in this process of stabilization. My role, I'm able to help folks.
I
Yeah.
appreciate it, we were just short on time. Did we hand it over too quick?
Well, I think, I'm not certain I have an answer for that. The question would have been, is your question, should we have gone live on October 2nd versus going live on January 1st?
There's go live decision, but I guess I'm more, should we have moved it over into this current framework that quickly? That is, should we have left the team that got us in there through more of an overlap period?
Well, so we started it's a great question. We started this operations committee in May. So for the past 5 months, we've been working to both define the scope of what we wanted SAP to be doing for us once we got it into production and we hit stabilization. I think from a project background, I would say it was the right time. And when your projects teams finishes and say, we're all done, that's the time when the operations team is already stood up and has said, we're ready, give us the ball. So we started that in May to start being ready for the turnover on October 2nd. And I think that we've got a great team of people who are working to identify problems and to find fixes for them. I think it's safe to say we would have preferred to have and expected to have fewer defects with our software system. However, it's a large, complex software system with a number of rules by which activities are done. I'll just give you one example, and that's security. So by security, what I mean is that in my role, in my functional role, I have people that report to me. So I can see their time cards and I can approve their time cards. If for some reason that security role was not given to me, I may be the person who has to approve timesheets, for example, but I can't see them, so I can't approve them. And that's a defect. And those sorts of defects, well, we've got, I think, one person, maybe two, right now, just working to make sure that the right roles are assigned to the right function so that the work gets done. If somebody needs to put in a purchase requisition and something has to get paid, is the right person there who can see that purchase requisition and say, yep, that's right, hit approve. So it's a complex problem.
Okay, we're running out of time, sir.
The next
One quick question, Chris. Then we're out of here.
My question is to the gentleman working for ML&P, and that is, do you find this answer satisfactory, that we're working towards a resolution to get your team paid, or should we expect an FLSA filing? We sure hope that we have some forbearance.
Get some variance on that, because I've told they're a week behind getting back.
All right.
One quick comment.
Yes, Suzanne.
I think that we expected to have a high number of defects because we cut down the testing period, and this was a very likely scenario.
You'll get us your responses to Zig so that we can look at them too.
I'd be happy to. And I think Zig is teed up to present to the Assembly next week. Let me
Yep.
apologize in advance. I'm off that day, so I'll miss his presentation.
I would like the CIO here,
Certainly, we can have.
because I've not seen them come here. I want them here to discuss this, since we've turned it over to them.
Well, so just.
For information, whoever you've got doing it, nuts and bolts.
Certainly. Well, the IT department runs the software engine pieces, but functionally, each of the other departments has that responsibility. For payroll, runs the payroll piece, and they interact to make sure that all the payroll stuff. Purchasing runs the parts about how to build a shopping cart and get a requisition done. So it's not that you have a single software group that is running. We have a project management structure and team in place that is nested within IT. I'll make sure they're here next
If
week.
you would,
for
please.
that.
Because we spent $82.2 million. We did not buy Blot. You know what your Blot is? Those are East German cars made with cardboard fenders. When the wall fell, they left it by the side of the road.
Okay.
We spent $82.2 million. I want to know we got a product that works. This meeting's over with.